Alrighty, well, we have a bit of an audience, so I say we go ahead and get started since we're being recorded anyways. Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm one of the PMs on the PowerShell team, and thank you for being at our community call this March. As I just said, the call will be recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. I see a question in here asking, it was just asking, will it be made available? Yes, it absolutely will be. If you aren't comfortable with being recorded, please drop from the call. Typically, we try and get the call up within 2 weeks, but it's usually a little bit quicker than that. Please remember our code of conduct, and we'll get started with our agenda. So first up, we have Danny talking about SSH inbox. I think you're muted.
I am muted. I clicked the camera button, not the mute button. Not both. All right. Hi, folks. Quick update on the OpenSSH side of things. So as some of you might know, Win32 OpenSSH, which is our port of the OpenSSH project from OpenBSD, which ships in Windows as a feature on demand. So an optional feature which must be installed. Starting in Windows Server 2025, that will now be installed by default. If you want to try that out before Windows Server 2025 releases fully in this fall, if you're part of the Windows Insider program, Insider builds are already available with OpenSSH installed by default. Again, by default, SSH is off, not on listening, and when it is turned on, it will default to private network only connections. So we are definitely still security minded, putting additional things into the box. So give it a try. I'd love to hear your feedback. And that's it on the OpenSSH side.
Awesome. Very cool news. From there, you'll get to hear from me for the next few updates. So first up, I'll give a little update on where we're at with PSResourceGet. So first I'll say that we did release another patch update to PSResourceGet. So this is 103. This release just included a few small updates. These were bug fixes that we found while doing feature work that we wanted to make sure sort of got backported, so to speak, and included in the patch release. So if you haven't, you can go ahead and safely update to 103 that is now out. Should be just minor bug fixes. Sort of the more exciting update, I would say, is that we are nearing completion of our first preview for the next iteration of PSResourceGet. So 110 preview 1 should be coming out soon. And what this preview does is it adds support for container registries as a gallery. So in this first iteration, we will be supporting ACR as a private gallery. So I can give just a quick demo as to what that will look like. And as I mentioned, you can see this all on GitHub now if you're curious to go look at the source and see what the PRs kind of look like. But the fully available package should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So I will share my screen. If we go here. All right, so if I do a get PS resource repository, pipe to full list, you can see the repositories that I have registered. And you'll see that I have this repository registered called ACR. You'll see the URI that I have here and a few other pieces of information. I'll show you how I got those pieces of information, how I registered the repository, and sort of how it works, but it should be a pretty simple demo. So if I go to the Azure portal here, you'll see that I created this container registry. It's called MVP 2024 because I originally created this specifically as like a short-lived demo for MVP Summit, but ended up scrapping that demo. But regardless, we will reuse it before I delete this all. To get the URI for registering my repository, I'm going to use this login server here. So if we copy that you will see, go back here, you'll see that the URI is just that plus the HTTPS name for PS resource repositories or PS repositories. These are just friendly names, so it can be whatever you want it to be. Trusted, I marked this as true because this is my private repository, so I'm going to know everything I put in there, and I'm going to trust it by default. Totally up to you. I just have the default priority here. And then for credential info, you'll notice that this is blank. So this is kind of an exciting feature in my mind, but for ACR or for Azure Container Registry, you will not need to use the sort of like secret management, secret store approach to credential persistence. We've actually directly integrated with the Azure Identity SDK. So at your first call to the repository, it will go through the various types of authentication. So it'll go through the authentication flow set up by Azure. So usually what this looks like is it'll prompt you in the browser to log in. There are other ways to log in, say like if you're in a CI/CD system or whatever it is, but kind of the default option I would say is the browser login, and it will save that for you, so you don't need to provide it there. And then API version is something that you sometimes need to worry about, sometimes don't. I didn't set this. It detected it based on my URI. It detected that it was a container registry, but if you ever knew you were using a container registry and it wasn't set, you could always set that. So that's a little info about the repository. If you want to see like the command, let's see, PS resource, try and spell it right. Name, ACR. Okay, cool. So you can see this is all I provided when I initially, I don't need the force, or I would need the force now because I'd be re-registering it. But anyways, this would be all the information I would need to provide because the credentials would be, or would be prompted. And yeah, okay. So once I have that registered, at publish time, I can show you the command I used to publish. Okay, so when I would publish, I would just provide a path to my PSV1 or a path to my folder, and then provide my repository. Again, I would not need to provide an API key or my credentials because those are cached. So just going to show that. And then I've already had this published, so I'm not going to run this again because it'll fail because I haven't updated the version of my package. But if you aren't familiar with container registries and you're wondering like, hey, how in the UI would I see my package? So what it's going to be called is a repository. Go to click here, and then you can see my test package. Here, this is it. 100 is the version that I have. So now if we run find PS resource, repository ACR, name, my test package, have all the suspense of a live demo. There you go, it returns. So hopefully that's a pretty straightforward demo. I could show you install as well, but it would behave exactly like you're familiar with install. So yeah, pretty straightforward, but that's basically how ACR works as a private repository. I'm gonna see if there are any. Are the Azure Identity SDK and the ALC, I immediately see a potential AZ conflict here. Yes, we did take very great care to avoid assembly load conflicts with AZ, and worked closely with the AZ team, who's also on the call here, to avoid any potential load conflict. So yeah. I'm just scrolling up. James, I'm not sure if I understand your question. Are you asking, is this about SSH or is it about PSResourceGet?
It's about how PSResourceGet would work in Docker, particularly, or in ACR. I'm a little concerned because I'm starting to create Docker images that are essentially wrappers and service points around modules. So I'm already kind of potentially hitting a name conflict if they can't coexist. But if they can coexist and this can have an entry point, then this is a great answer here. Because what I am actually doing is creating a container image, and what I think you're doing here is creating a container image. So as long as I can just throw a proper Docker image in there, this is great.
Yeah. So what we're creating is OCI artifacts. So those should be able to be side by side, I would think. But I'm happy to follow up with you.
Yeah, let's take this offline.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Great. So that is the PSResourceGet update. And then the next update is around PS Gallery. So a few things to know about PS Gallery. I will actually just share my screen for this one as well. Okay, great. So I just wanted to point out a few UI changes that we have made. So the first thing you'll notice is that like the statistics is gone here. Oh no, it's missing. So aggregated statistics was broken, and we decided to make the call to remove it and focus on individual package statistics instead. So we have begun the process of rewriting the individual statistics pipeline as part of a long-term effort to kind of like rewrite the entire gallery. We're starting with the individual statistics pipeline. We kind of have to do the gallery piece by piece to make sure we are not sacrificing things like availability or, causing downtime. But we are in the process of doing small rewrites of the gallery, starting with the individual statistics pipeline. We are not planning to rewrite aggregate statistics. It's a really intensive job, and we weren't seeing a lot of value for it. However, more than happy to take feedback if folks feel that aggregated statistics would be really useful. So that is one thing. Second change we've made is, I'm just going to pick the very first package. We have swapped out owners, and then if you go to package detail, and authors. So we've switched these two in the UI so that the first thing you see is a package owner and a package author. So I just wanted to explain to folks sort of what the difference between these two things is, so that if you're on the gallery and you're looking at packages, you kind of have a little bit of literacy around what you're seeing. So in this case, authors is pulled from the package metadata. It's pulled from the PSD1. Anything can be put here, and there's really no verification. I mean, it has to be a string, but aside from that, there's no verification as to what somebody puts here. You could put any name here, right? So I want folks to be aware of that this should be untrusted by default. This is whoever the person is claiming to be as the author, right? In terms of owner, the owner is the person's username in the gallery, right? So this is their like Microsoft account username. So there is some level of trust there, and that really is an official account. But at the same time, you could hypothetically, create an account under any alias, right? And as gallery admins, we don't have a process in place to verify that, Michael@live.com is really Mike. So I want folks to be aware of that. But one thing that can be handy is you can click on, this, and you can see all the other packages that are owned by this package owner, and kind of just view some of the other stuff that they've published and see their whole portfolio and that sort of thing. So that can be helpful in distinguishing, like, hey, is this package really, a part of the whole Azure, like AZ module, the whole, that sort of thing, but can't necessarily be used to confirm identity. So wanted to call out those few things about the gallery. And then we're seeing if there's okay, any questions about that? I did notice that in the issue on GitHub, or the discussion for this community call, there was a question about the gallery all up. So I thought this would be a good time to just answer that question as well. So let me just pull up that to make sure I'm answering the right question. Okay, so the question asks, are there any future plans for PowerShell Gallery other than keeping it as is? And two options are proposed. One is migrate to NuGet V3 or move to something else like Azure Container Registry. And second is to use some NuGet V3 shim like the one Justin Grody made with PWSH.gallery. So my short answer is yes and no. So with everything in PowerShell, I would say that there's we support users at the bleeding edge and legacy users. And there's so many folks out there on down level versions of PowerShell Get that only support NuGet V2 endpoints that I don't see us ever removing the NuGet V2 endpoint from the PowerShell Gallery. So famous last words, but at least in the short to medium term, we have absolutely no plans to get rid of the gallery as is, in the sense that like you can expect it to be there, you can expect it to be available, and you can expect that NuGet V2 endpoint to be as is. With that being said, we are making a lot of investments into the gallery right now, and you can see that in some of the things I just talked about. And also there's a number of other work items that I haven't mentioned. We're investing pretty heavily in areas around security, trust, and availability for the PowerShell Gallery itself. Those are our like top priorities. I'd say like those are maybe higher priorities to us at the moment than necessarily adding a V3 endpoint to the gallery. But if you have a particular need for a V3 endpoint added to the gallery, once again, happy to hear about that. We are adding an additional endpoint related to ACR. We have plans for that in the pipeline that you'll see very shortly. And that's kind of in response to needing a more trusted package source. So we see the PowerShell Gallery as a really great place for community resources. And so you'll continue to see, I think, Gallery as is, plus improvements, plus rewrites, plus more availability, security, and trust. But ultimately, the PowerShell Gallery as is, as a community resource. And then we also separately have plans to continue to invest in Microsoft Artifact Registry as a trusted repository for Microsoft-owned packages. And so this kind of alleviates some of the pressure that we have as a gallery and as package owners have as Microsoft to be verified publishers. So we'll continue to have that discussion, talk more about that as we get there in terms of having that available in previews, start that kind of development work. The first step towards that is having ACR available as a private repository. So happy to answer any more questions about that sort of as a plan. But in short, that's kind of what we're looking at. So yes and no. Also sounds like Justin has something in the works, which is awesome. Love to see the community like work around too. I think that that's totally encouraged and awesome as well. So love to see that. I have one more item and then I will promise I'll pass it off and you get to hear someone else speak. The third item that I have is VS Code updates. So earlier in March, we did have a preview update to the VS Code extension. A few things I would want to highlight from that release would be we had 2 updates to modules that are heavily used in the extension. And so 2 of those would be PSReadLine and PS Script Analyzer. Those both saw updates, which will be talked about later on, and were included in this release. We also removed the Command Explorer as visible by default. So if you saw that go away, know that the feature, and you really loved it, know that the feature is still available. It's still on by default in ISC mode, and you can still turn it on, but we've removed it as default in the UI. So feel free to check out the changelog for any other updates, and look forward to a stable release coming in the next few weeks. Thomas is asking another question back to the gallery around, is there going to be support for reserved namespace prefixes like NuGet.org to alleviate trust issues? Yes. So again, look forward to a blog post on this, like hopefully in the next month. We're working on some backend support for this right now. So there's been some, we're working on the engineering side of this to support this in the process right now. What I will say about my feeling about namespaces, I think that they are great. And what they tell you is that the package owner is who they say they are, in the sense that like the package owner has registered with us and they published, and that's how you get the check mark, right? So that's what the check mark means. That's what namespaces mean, is that, you know, somebody has reserved a namespace and that actual publisher is publishing under that namespace. So in that regard, you can trust the package because you can trust the publisher, which is great. Where I think that namespaces can fall short is that I think it can give a false sense of trust, in the sense that the packages haven't actually undergone any additional verification in terms of like security pipelines or scanning or things like that. So that's a second step that we're also working on, is improving those kinds of scanning as well. Keep the questions coming in the chat, but I'll stop talking for now. And I will pass things over to Michael with the DSC V3 update.
Awesome. Great job, Sydney. And thank you for so many details on so many projects. That was awesome. And a couple more questions still coming up in chat. I'm going to start by putting a link in chat to the GitHub location for the DSC project. So we were originally planning on being code complete on DSC V3 by end of March, which would be the end of next week. I think we're going to be a couple of weeks offset. I would look more to the middle of April at this point. But we are doing really well. Active PRs, many active issues. We're trying to be as transparent as we can through the issues list to keep the community informed of what we're working on, and like the biggest things that we're trying to solve. I would say if you're looking at DSC V3 for the first time, first of all, I would probably wait until we get to code complete to start testing, unless you're interested in like testing along the way as we make progress and providing feedback on changes. If you're just wanting to do validation and kind of see how it's different, I would hold off a couple more weeks until we hit code complete. But the way you can think about it is, with DSC V3, there's basically an abstraction between DSC and the resources. And so the goal is for complete compatibility with existing resources, and open the door to basically resources written in any language, including native commands. And so you might ask, like, oh, well, why do you think that you can have complete compatibility on a new platform with existing resources? Which would be a great question. Because we can abstract where and how we're executing from what we're executing, then I have a PR open right now for the adapter for PowerShell 7. So that like if you're authoring a new resource and you want to do it in either in script or in classes, hopefully classes in PowerShell 7, and you want to take advantage of those new features, that should just work. The next one that we'll be working on is an adapter actually for Windows PowerShell 5.1. So like literally if you have a resource that was written for PowerShell 5 and you want to use it with DSC V3, then you would just, if you do have any problems with 7, you could just choose to use the adapter for 5.1 and run it like where it was written for. Like I guess run it in the language where it was originally developed is a better way to say that. So that's how we're hoping to reach very good compatibility. Time will tell, but that is our goal, to have very good compatibility with existing resources. But then also because of that abstraction, we've always had this community feedback around the script resource. Great tool for learning, difficult methodology for testing. And so we've taken that to heart. And the one that we'll be working on after Windows PowerShell will be an adapter specifically targeted at one-liners and PS1 scripts. So the idea there is if you're just learning and you want to just take very simple examples, put them in a get.ps1 and test.ps1, you should be able to do that as a learning tool. And by componentizing down to those PS1 files, you should still be able to write pester tests and evaluate parameters and do cool stuff there. So we think we can even go deeper than we have before on and previously, basically, we would copy and paste that one-liner into a configuration MOF or to a configuration PS1, which was very difficult to write tests around. So we think we're going to hit like the best of both worlds in terms of having a platform that it's easy to get started, good compatibility, great path moving forward. And then the really cool thing is through that abstraction, if somebody wants to write their resources in Bash or in Python or in Go, or even just build it into their application so that you can literally just have configuration options in your application, you should be able to just have a JSON file that maps to that executable and just use it as it stands. So we're really optimistic about V3. Tons and tons of new features, concepts of doing assertions before you can, before needing, or I guess to run checks and evaluate your environment before getting into a resource, being able to pass data between resources, having JSON functions, like so many cool features. You can see all about those in the issues list and follow our progress. But again, I would say mid-April at this point is a likely time where we can hit code complete. Code complete just means essentially that we will have met the requirements for our partners in machine configuration and Winget to start doing their validation. But once we consider it to be code complete, anything that we do from that point forward would that makes a major change would be considered a breaking change. So we might, take a request from machine config, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that if we make changes, we might break Winget. So we're working very closely with partners and optimistic about where we're headed. So I put the link to the repo in the chat. Again, you're welcome to go out. It's actually a very easy platform to build and play with today, but I would say in a few more weeks, we'll be ready for some fun validation, and maybe we'll do a public bug bash at that point. So that's it. Thank you very much. I will hand it back. Let me go back and see who I'm handing it to, unless somebody can tell me.
I think it's Jim with
Great.
the PSSA.
Awesome.
Release.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I thought it was going to be Jason. But hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Oh, good. We just did a release of Script Analyzer 1.22. It was about a couple of weeks ago now. Starting to see some uptake on it. We've given it off to the editor services folks. Make sure that we don't get in the way of any of their scenarios. We haven't done anything to break them. So give it a take a look and let us know. I should shout out to Chris Bergmeister, who was instrumental in getting the in finishing the release. So thanks, Chris. It's been a whole bunch of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, and thanks, Chris. Definitely. I'll also just mention that this release was really community driven. We took in a lot of community PR, so thanks to anyone who opened issues or opened PRs and kind of drove this release for us. Next up, we have Steven with a PSReadLine release.
Hey everyone, just wanted to share we did a beta 0 release for PSReadLine 2.4.0. There's not a whole lot of new features per se. There's a lot of just bug fixes and kind of polishing up of some experiences. I will share the changelog in case you're curious, but yeah, that's kind of it. Nothing super wild here, but we're still looking at other features and improvements. So if you're interested in sharing ways that you think PSReadLine can improve, please of course submit an issue and we'll take a look at it. So that's kind of all I got to share on the PSReadLine front.
Thank you, Stephen. And then we've got Sean with our docs update.
Yeah, so the not a lot of new docs in the last couple of months, but a lot of incremental releases in the PowerShell space over the last couple of months. So putting links in the chat there to updated documentation. Of course, we've updated the documentation for PowerShell 7.5 preview releases. There's been a ton of work going on in desired state configuration, as Michael said, and I'll toss this over to Mikey in a minute to kind of hit the highlights there. There's a lot of documentation work he's done there, and then of course, as Jim just mentioned, the release of Script Analyzer. There was a couple of new rules that were added, and so that documentation has been added and updated for the new release. Mikey, you want to give us a quick rundown on the DSC docs? Mikey, are you there? He was earlier. Looks like he maybe had to drop.
Yeah.
All I can say is, well, let me just quickly share my screen. If you go out to the changelog documentation, you'll see all the changes that came in, what was added. Lots of good information here, and then the associated documentation for all of this was updated as well. So a lot of good work in the doc space here from Mikey. And that's my docs update.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. Well, with that concludes the core of our agenda. Before we jump into questions, Jordan, did you want to do your demo?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hey everyone, my name is Jordan. You may have seen me around the place, but I'm here to demo just sort of a quick project that I've been working on, which is Remote Forge. Now, is it possible to share my screen? It just says only meeting organizers.
Yeah, let me give you presenter rights.
Thank you.
1 second. Okay, I found you.
There we are.
Cool.
Okay. All right, let me know if that's coming through.
Yep, looks good.
Yep, awesome. Okay. So essentially, Remote Forge is a project that I've been working on. It's sort of a provider for remote plugins that you can use with PowerShell remoting. So built in, you've got a whole bunch of ones like WinRM, SSH, Docker, Hyper-V, and sort of process remoting ones. In 7.3, the remoting subsystem was sort of opened up for third-party APIs. At the time, it's sort of just like exposing the existing API that's out there, and I don't think it sort of went further enough to really make it useful for people to either both write their own remoting plugins or even consume them themselves. So some of the issues that I've sort of come across is you need to reinvent the whole wheel. Like you have to implement your own commandlets to create the actual session. You can't really easily use it with invoke command, especially when you're going with parallel, because you have to create the sessions manually and then sort of combine that with invoke command. And even just sort of generating or creating your actual plugins and themselves, the API is a bit difficult to actually use, especially if you're not sort of used to how it actually works, and dealing with things like errors and sort of problematic scenarios can be quite difficult to actually implement. So that's why I've been working on this thing called Remote Forge, and essentially it provides both what I would call maybe an easy API for people to use. So essentially, they just need to provide a method to create the connection, a method to read the data, and a method to write the data, and that's about it. As well as that, it also provides a few different commandlets, which is designed to be extensible with third-party connections, which in this case I'm calling forges. So instead of remote command, we have invoke remote. Sorry, I want that. I want to get help. So in this case here, like there's a few different options. You've just got a connection info, which takes an array of either strings or PS sessions or connection info objects. So you can run that in parallel. You can either specify the script as a file, like you can do with invoke command, or as a string with the script block. Some extra features that I've added on there. So instead of argument list only taking an array of arguments, you can actually pass a hash table or any sort of dictionary like object and sort of splat that into there, so you don't have to rely on positional arguments. Another command that we have is invoke remote forge session. So this is sort of like a parallel to new PS session. The same thing, it's just sort of an overlay of that other sort of plugins to use to easily create PS sessions from their implementations. And then sort of the last main one that's out there is enter remote. So this is like enter PS session, but in this case here, you've just got that support for the Forge side. With the Forges, right now I've got sort of two that's provided built in. So there's SSH and WSMan. So that's just sort of the built-in ones that are provided by PowerShell. But in this case here, I've been playing around with a few different sort of alternate SSH options as sort of a demo. So HVC is a custom one that's designed for Hyper-V Connect. So you can connect and run things on a Hyper-V VM without any networking setup, which is quite useful. SSH V2 is sort of just the SSH built-in stuff with a few extra features like password support that you don't currently have. SSH Net is sort of one that isn't working right now, but it's designed to be using the .NET assembly SSH.NET. So instead of spawning a new process, it's using a built-in library, which opens up a few new features that isn't currently available. So using them is quite simple. In this case here, I want to enter remote. In this case, I've just got a Linux VM under this IP address. I'm currently not actually, I don't trust the host key, so I do need to supply a credential and then, sorry, an option to sort of skip that. And then I'm wanting to provide explicit password credentials. So in this case here, it's just going to prompt me from this one here. So in this case, it's just a very simple password. And now I've sort of entered that session. If I was to use, so let's go enter PS session, host name. After this one here, it will actually ask me, prompt me to trust the key. And it'll prompt me the password in there, which I actually have to do physically through the terminal. But I can actually do a get credential. I can type. I can create a credential object. So I can get source that from anything that I want. So like secret store or anything, and I can actually provide that explicitly and actually connect that without any prompts from SSH. So that's sort of one of the extra features that I've been playing around with. Now in this case here, I've connected to a remote VM, and with PS remoting, it doesn't actually have a console for applications to prompt back on you. So if I was to do sudo, it's going to fail because there's no terminal to actually prompt me for the password. In this case here, I've got a new forge in this section here. Sorry. Import the module first. In this case here, it's added a new one. And what I can do is I can use invoke remote I specify the forge ID. In this case here, sudo doesn't have any extra options, but I could do like host name if I was connecting to a specific host. But I just don't have anything. Who am I? Just for a quick test. In this case here, it's actually going to prompt me for the sudo password, even though there's no console. It's using PowerShell remoting's host sort of prompting to get that working there. So I'll just type that one in, and it works. I'll clear the cache. And once again, we can also use a credential for it. You can prompt me for that one there, and I can go new sudo and type credential, and it can do sudo without actually prompting me for it. So it has a whole bunch of abilities to do various things. One thing that I'm not 100% sort of happy on is the fact that you actually have to provide this new sudo forge or new such and such forge info object actually created for every connection that you're using. I'm wondering whether it's a better idea to pass in like an options parameter in this command that gets passed to those forges to be able to create it, similar to what sort of secret management does. But there's a few things I'm sort of playing around with to try and improve the UX around that. But like in this simple case here, the idea is that you should be able to specify just sort of the forge ID that you're using. So in this case, it's sudo, and then sort of extra options that you're on top of there. So if like it was SSH, I could do SSH hostname or SSH at hostname and such and such. But for those sort of more advanced scenarios where it doesn't cover the common options, that's what these commandlets that your module would offer. And that's sort of just a read-only object. So in this case here, if I was to output that itself, it's sort of a very simple object that it knows how to create the connection from there. The last option, so if I will exit out of that session, there's another one which we have the HVC one. Forge info, I want to go to WinVM. That's the name of my virtual environment, and I also want to skip the host key check. I believe this is actually going to fail because I've got a bug. Oh no, maybe not. That is why. Sorry, wrong username, and then debugging doesn't help. Yeah. And so it's connected to an actual Windows VM that I have here. What you can do as well, if you're wanting to go in parallel, I can do connection 2. I also see I've got a typo there, so I need to fix that. Sorry, I can't remember the IP address. Provide the connection, fix up this typo. And then if I'm wanting to run it in parallel, I can just provide those connection options as an argument. And then it should run that. Sorry, once again, I need to fix that. As you can see, it's still sort of beta and I'm working through the kinks for that one there. Just provide the password explicitly. In this case here, it's run it on both our Hyper-V VM, which is connection 1. You can see the output here, and then also the Linux VM, which is just a VM and it's called localhost. If we were to capture that output like you can with invoke command, you can see that here's computer name is an option there. So you can see that's from SSH info. That's dependent on the actual object that's actually created. I don't think I've got a more human-friendly name sort of set up for that one there, but there's various options that you get from that. So essentially, like it's designed to be able to help people write their own connection plugins. So I've got a few ideas that I'm wanting to work on, like a Python one that you can execute Python scripts through invoke remote. but it's also designed to sort of extend some of the features that may be missing in the built-in ones. Like with SSH, you have password support or an easy way of supplying extra options that people might not know about. And yeah, that's essentially it. Sorry, I was sort of scrambling with doing the demos here, so hopefully that can help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan. That was a really great demo. Super appreciate it. Feel free to follow up with Jordan in the chat if you have any comments or questions on the demo. Very cool. From that, we can open up the floor to questions. I'm going to start with, I saw 2 questions in the GitHub issue, but feel free to continue to add them to the chat. Use the raise hand feature or add them in the GitHub discussion. And so the first question that I thought we would go for is, what is the time frame of PlatyPS V2? Will the current version get support of components? Jason, are you the right person for this question?
Hey, I think I am. So PlatyPS V2. So let's talk about this for a second. We're currently doing work on PlatyPS. I apologize that for those of you that have been waiting, it seems like it's taken a while, but here's the deal. We're working with an internal partner. The internal partner happens to be the internal partner that makes all of the docs at Microsoft. And this is in coordination with Sean Wheeler, who has been a great contributor to this project. So PlatyPS right now, as we are building it for an internal partner, we want to make sure we can dog food it, but we've re-architected it. Thanks to Jim Truer and Aditya, they've helped us re-architect, and I mean, it's really different than it was before. Once we get that through our internal partner and it seems to improve the docs overall at Microsoft, then we're going to re-evaluate what we want to ship as a public release, and that will be released. It may be released as, I don't know if you noticed this or not, PlatyPS isn't actually released as a version 0.1. So we may release this as the actual version 1 of PlatyPS in the upcoming months, but it's going to take us a little bit. So towards the end of the year, I think I'll have more information towards a public release. But what you're going to find in this as we release it is the conversions to MAML, the conversions to YAML are much faster. They're highly validated. You're going to find that the architecture makes more sense, that the commandlets make more sense. And I offer any moment to Jim Truer, who happens to be here tonight, to also speak up about this. But I'm actually very excited about what we're going to do. So hang on, we're almost there, and I'm really excited about the release. So thanks, Sydney. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the answer, Jason. The second question I saw came from Thomas. It's about semantic versioning. I read into the issue a little bit. Happy to give a response, but
yeah,
do you want to ask a specific question? Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. So
that'd be great. Awesome.
All right, so the background of the semantic versioning issue that's linked in the chat is the adding support for semantic versioning in the engine due to PowerShell Git, since PowerShell Git supports semantic versioning. So here's some of the things about it. So the working group decision didn't have any context, address any of the issues, or consider alternate solutions from the verdict that was posted there. As such, it indicates that semantic versioning is not supported in PowerShell and by extension PSResourceGet and should be removed. The scope of the work in the issue is allowing semantic versioning in the module commandlets, which could be accomplished by adding a 65 kilobyte dependency on NuGet versioning. Here are some of the issues when PSResourceGet supports semantic versioning while the engine does not. Number one, pre-release binary modules cannot be updated to stable. The largest impact of this is PSReadLine, as users who install pre-release versions will have to undergo workarounds to install the stable version, thus hurting testing adoption. 2, pre-release and stable versions cannot be installed at the same time. 3, the formatter displays a fake pre-release property causing user confusion. PowerShell should either fully support semantic versioning in the engine or remove it completely and in PSResourceGet. My concern about working group verdicts and the lack of transparency could be addressed by working group meetings being recorded, having meeting minutes, and a publicly accessible vote with accompanying concurring and dissenting opinions. This would help users know their issue has been earnestly considered. So I want PowerShell committee to review the future of semantic versioning, as PowerShell or PSResourceGet should not support a versioning scheme that PowerShell cannot. I'm gonna open it up there.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Thomas. And I'm happy to, if anyone else wants to chime in, happy to take other comments on that topic right now as well. But
yeah, just being really brief, there's a lot
Sure.
in that area that could be desired. My most potent and painful memory is that it's not really possible to have a command or module properly with a semantic version name. You have to keep alternating the name because the version field is locked to being a proper numeric version. And so it creates a lot of confusion. It's something that almost every organization that I've worked with in the past 7 or 8 years has wanted to adopt SemVer and has essentially used PowerShell's failure in this area as a cudgel against PowerShell adoption internally. So this is actually significantly damaging, in my opinion, as a persistent thing. And it could be fixed very, very easily by essentially having either the version string or version be capable of being a full string, or the version be augmented by a version and a string variant. So it's just a little big thing, but it is something that I would estimate probably costs PowerShell, I don't know, 5 or 10 companies a year in terms of internal beachheads and battles.
Okay.
So sorry,
Yeah,
but
no.
I do feel strongly as well. Thank you, Thomas, for bringing this up.
Totally appreciate the sentiment. I am not going to respond on behalf of the engine working group, as I am not a part of it, or on behalf of the team at the moment, but more than happy to kind of bring this back to the team, and maybe we can talk about it again next call, and just kind of think about what the next step could be. I know that there is this existing issue on semantic versioning. Let me just pull it up and take a look at it. The issue is closed. I'm wondering if we think it would be helpful, there's good context in that issue, or if it would be helpful if we started a fresh discussion or issue on this topic.
I would say leave the existing one open because it has about 100 comments that are very useful.
Good context that we don't want to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Fair enough. Again, not part of the engine working group, so don't want to speak on their behalf. But happy to collect the feedback and appreciate you speaking up. So thank you for that. I did also see a question in the chat around, speaking of working group schedule, is there a general schedule? So working groups, typically schedule themselves. So I would say cadence is different. I would say for all of the working groups I'm a part of, which is only a couple, we meet on Mondays, and we try and go through all the issues on Mondays, but kind of varies because that's community day for us. So we try and triage on Mondays. I saw Jim come off mute. Did you want to say something, Jim?
The engine working group meets every 2 weeks.
Okay, great.
And we've discussed that issue at length, and they're all part of the working group notes, which are part of the Discord.
Okay.
You said there's a Discord?
Yes, I did.
I think circulating that link would be helpful. Thank you.
Is there like a known backlog, like the working groups up to what they think is sort of where the timeline's at, or do they have sort of a large backlog that they need to work through? It just seems a bit opaque right now, where I'm sure they've got a lot of work going on. I don't want to seem needy, but gets a bit frustrating when you're sort of putting in some work and either you get silence or you get maybe one comment and then sort of nothing else beyond that.
Different work groups have different backlogs. The engine working group has a not insignificant backlog. We spend a lot of time discussing the issues during the time that we meet, and then we capture all the notes as part of the Discord in the working group notes, and those are available on the Discord. I don't know about whether it's public or not. I assume it is. There are on the engine working group, it's half and half community members and Microsoft employees.
Yeah.
I think it would be
The
helpful
other thing,
if the working group
oh,
would
sorry, guys.
publish like agendas, like here's the issues that we're going to work through this meeting, so that people can see in the next week or 2 or 5, hey, Jordan's issue is coming up in 3 weeks, so he has an expectation of when that will be released.
Yeah,
If I
think
could
that's,
interject,
yeah. Go for it, Jason.
I just want to follow up on what Jim said, that a lot of the working groups meet on a very timely schedule, but they also have very extensive backlogs. This is due to the size of amount of issues that we have. And directly to answer the question that just came in, I think it was from Thomas or whatever, about producing a list of what issues are next. I actually produced that list, and many of the working groups do produce that list to the working group, but only with a couple of days of advance. In other words, we're not at a point where we can do that like weeks out. It comes down to taking things off the backlog and moving them in. And some of those discussions, just as an example, in the working group interactive one that we just had, we had an issue that took the entire time that was allotted to us that we're still not done with, and we have to come back to. A lot of these issues at this point are not just, is it an issue that impacts you, but is it an issue that impacts the 2 billion users a month that we have, and how does that impact it on that scale? So it takes us some time to work through those issues. So we don't necessarily have that kind of detailed timeline to provide, although we are working to try to provide more details and that kind of thing as we go forward. So thank you for letting me interject.
Yeah, I think one other thing I'll just say, and then I'll let other folks speak as well. If you're ever curious to see if you want to see the query that any working group is using for the most part, to see what are the total sum of issues that they're looking at and what they're pulling from, if you just go to the PowerShell issues and use the tags needs triage and then the working group label, that's what they're picking from. So that could be helpful. But I think Jordan, you were about to say something before I said that.
Yeah, I don't want to sound ungrateful or anything like that.
Sure.
This is sort of just like a suggestion. Is it possible that potentially that there could be allotted times carved out when you're meeting? So maybe 10-15 minutes to go through new issues that have popped up that might be a bit quicker to sort of go through, rather than spending the entire time on some sort of older issues that might need to be going through, or even focusing on PRs that people might have sort of put in, sort of to try and clear out some of the stuff that sort of appeared there.
The actual fact is that that efficiency of time does not exist, because you will get into the middle of something. Oh, this is easy, and we'll talk about it for 45 minutes. So
Yeah.
it doesn't, that's not how it works out.
I think something we sometimes say is all the easy problems are solved, but yeah, I think to if it's any consolation, we do put a lot of thought into every single issue, even if it feels like, and so sometimes I think we could do a better job of communicating that. But if anything, I think we oftentimes could spend less, could have more efficiency. But yeah, usually there's a lot of time spent into issues. Thomas, I think you're trying to say something.
Yeah, I think the main thing, right, is for the community side, if we can pull back the curtain and see the transparency of it and see, oh, Jim's meeting for the engine working group spent 45 minutes on this one thing, or they worked through these 5 issues, the more transparency that we can see from our side will alleviate those concerns of like, this is just a black box that we have no input or say into. We can triage it, say, tag it for the working group to look at, and then may or may not get a response in ever.
We can certainly
Yeah.
bring to the committee whether or not we can release the working group notes. I don't see that there's a problem with that. There's nothing in there that is something that needs protection. So I don't know that I expect it. You'll see, we don't keep every word that is said, and we're not going to record them. That's quite problematic actually in the industry. But we do keep a kind of a somewhat flow of consciousness as we discuss these issues. And I don't know that there is any reason that we can't release that, although I'm not a lawyer and I don't speak, I'm not going to pretend to be one. So there may be other issues at play here that I can't speak to, but we can certainly bring it to the committee to find out if there's a way we could very easily release the last, if it's allowed, release the last 18 months of notes. That doesn't seem to be a problem, or release them every week. We'll have to
Or just
follow
going
up.
forward, maybe.
Yeah, I think that
let me
that
just
would be helpful.
let me just jump in real quick and say that, Thomas, I really appreciate this and we'll definitely work towards it. However, there are some legal requirements and some legal restrictions about the conversations that we have. That's why we don't record them. There are some intellectual property discussions that occur because of the nature of some of these issues. If these were easy issues, they would have been handled by the community much sooner than they reached one of the working groups. And so sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, I'm saying sometimes it is challenging us for us to be able to release like recordings, as Jim pointed out. But I do appreciate what you're saying. I really do. And I'd like to get more transparency into it. So maybe that's a conversation that we can keep going and seeing what we can do to make sure that we are providing you with the transparency that you would like to see. I mean, I'd love it to have, your issue comes up on Tuesday, March 23rd or whatever that is. I'd love to have that kind of scale, but right now we just don't, because like Jim had pointed out, sometimes an issue that seems like it's going to be easy takes us days to work through. So we'll try to work at that, but it's a little bit challenging.
And there is something that could be done with the data that we have today, because all of this activity that happens in the GitHub repository against issues is queryable. We could go through and provide statistics on backlogs and how long issues are in need triage, and we can look into collecting those statistics if you think that would make you feel better. I can tell you that from the working group, the engine working group perspective, it is getting smaller, the backlog, and I know it is getting for some of the other working groups as well. So it may be opaque to you, but we can definitely see that the list is getting shorter as time goes on, because we are spending more and more time doing this, and because we know that it's important.
If I may for a second, a restatement of the problem from the community perspective, and then a corollary and a suggestion. The problem ends up being that squeaky wheels are supposed to get grease, and we don't know where to squeak. Like, aside from just filing an issue and hoping, it's hard to get traction. We don't really kind of know how to engage. Okay? The corollary here is, as droll as it might be, a condo board. I'm on my condo board. We have to meet every month. We make decisions that impact everybody, and we produce minutes. And every stakeholder in the community gets those minutes because they're a stakeholder in the community. And I think Jim's suggestion of releasing those notes or minutes would go a really long way to the transparency concern. But I can say even on the scale of 50 people, that people can get really angry if they don't feel like they have a say in the decision-making body that rules over them. So that, I think, is part of what's going on. I think your suggestion is really great as far as releasing minutes. I think the other thing that a condo board traditionally does that would be great to do for the working groups is essentially allow people to come to a given forum, especially if their issue is coming to the floor. So if you know you're going to be discussing an issue that I've been working on, you don't need to invite me into the whole working group to invite me to the working group for the 5 minutes to talk about the issue. That's normally front loaded so that you get it out of the way so that you can get the person out and proceed with private business. But I think the corollary works really well. And I think adopting the practices that you would adopt if you wanted your condo board to not suck would be a great experience here. 2 cents over.
Great. Well, we're a little bit over time, so I think we'll start to wrap things up. Do appreciate the feedback from everyone. And I am happy to kind of collect this feedback and bring it to the committee. I'm not personally a committee member, but happy to kind of bring this to the committee and we can kind of move forward from there. As we wrap things up, if you have continued thoughts or feelings on this, or if you're watching the recording and have continued thoughts on and feelings on this, Stephen, maybe we can leave the discussion open for this community call for a little bit, so folks have a place to voice that. And then we'll kind of move forward from there. But thanks for being here today. Hopefully our little experiment of expanding to a new time zone was successful. Thanks for all the folks who don't usually get to join who are here today. We really do appreciate you being here. And we'll see you, if not next month, we'll see you in September. But yeah, thanks again, everyone. And thanks for bringing up this discussion topic as well.
And how many of you are going to be at the PS Summit next month?
Oh yeah, PS Summit. I'll be there.
Sweet. Thank you.